So I remember her telling me, unless there is a miracle, I think you will fail your first certificate exam. So, well, I didn't turn water into wine, but at least I passed my English test. Then at uni, I decided to study languages because, well, I found communicating with other people from different countries very interesting, right? So, learning languages, it's a way to discover the world as well. I have the freedom as well by creating my own material to share culture and music, bring up different topics to engage in conversation, right?
Hello and welcome to the Qualified Tutor Podcast, the podcast that brings you the latest in the world of tutoring, edtech and education, and hopefully inspires in you the big change that each and every one of us is capable of. Qualified Tutor is an industry-leading tutor training organisation and online tutoring community for thousands of tutors around the world. This podcast is the voice of this community, where we aim to hear from tutors, teachers, entrepreneurs, coaches, business experts, students, tutorpreneurs, and more from the world of tutoring about what inspires them every day, how they can help tutors like you, and what they've learnt about tutoring along the way. The question is, what will you learn today? Hello and welcome to the 110th episode of the Qualified Tutor Podcast. My name is Ludo Miller, the host of this podcast. Welcome back to regular listeners. Welcome to any of you for whom this is your first time listening to the Qualified Tutor Podcast. And of course, a huge welcome to today's guest, Pablo Bue. Pablo, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me.
It's been a busy day of tutoring for you today, hasn't it?
Yeah, it has been. In fact, I've given 4 lessons already. So yeah, it's been a busy day, but I'm happy.
He's happy. Yeah, well, that's great to see. Pablo's got a wonderful story, and we'll be getting into it a little bit more over the next sort of 25 minutes or so. But just to give you listeners some context, Pablo is a brand ambassador of the hugely popular tutoring platform Superprof. Now, Superprof support thousands of pupils around the world by providing a space for students and tutors to connect and learn together. Anyone who's used the platform will value its very easy to use interface, and it's got very sort of efficient, effective filtering tools for parents looking for tutors, and also for tutors to be able to promote themselves and create their own profile. I myself have and still am a tutor on the platform. I think it's really one of the best out there. But Pablo is also a true polyglot, and that is, if you don't know it, a speaker of multiple languages. Hailing from Spain, Pablo added French at university, Mandarin Chinese in his own time, and Portuguese through a group of Brazilian friends he made a short while back. So a real spread of languages there. And this mastery of languages has given Pablo a greater sense of culture and of identity, both within himself and of those around him, his students, his friends. It's really very, very impressive. And coupled with this linguistic capability, Pablo also has a genuine interest in teaching and learning, and ensuring that that environment is a fun and enjoyable one for all his students. So let's hear. We're all lucky enough today to share in that enthusiasm. I'm sure that will come across in this episode. But welcome, Pablo. What's giving you reason to smile today?
So, basically, today, as I said, it has been a busy day, and I have to thank Superprof as well for that, because many of my students come from that platform as well. And as I said, I'm happy because I do what I love to do, which is basically anything related to languages, right, and sharing my knowledge to other students.
It's excellent to see that, Pablo, genuinely. Now, for those of you who've listened to the last few episodes will know that most episodes of late start with a often entertaining little segment, which is that I've asked guests before they come on to see if they can locate some old school reports and get them to read out the most interesting, the most symbolic of those reports at the start of the episode. Pablo couldn't find any school reports, but he did send me a very amusing piece of feedback from an instructor on a course he had. Pablo, I'll let you read out that feedback and speak a little bit about it.
Okay, yeah. So, well, as Ludo has said, I don't have any school reports. However, well, I remember, I was in secondary school. I remember this English teacher who was definitely sure I would fail my first certificate exam. First certificate exam is like a B2 level, more or less, right? So I remember her telling me, unless there is a miracle, I think you will fail your first certificate exam. So, well, I didn't turn water into wine, but at least I passed my English test. And in fact, I currently prepare students to pass their first and advanced exams. So yeah, it's been quite an unexpected outcome. Yeah,
quite a miraculous outcome.
Yeah,
actually. Yeah. I think your teacher would be probably very excited to hear that you now not only passed, but you also now teach it to others. I think that's a great, slightly ironic reversal of fortunes. And Pablo, that's excellent. So we'd love to know. I mean, there's obviously so much to background to where you are today and what you do today. And we'll probably only scratch the surface of that over the next 25 minutes. But what is your why as a tutor? Why do you do what you do?
So, well, I began to be interested in English and literature in secondary school. You know, I had this really cool English teacher. Okay, hi John, if you hear me. His lessons were quite funny, you know, because of his sense of humor. You know, very very British. The sort of like ironic, dry British humor, right? So I attended this kind of posh school, right? And you could see this English teacher who went against the current in that sort of environment, you know? So apart from learning English, right, with this teacher, yeah, he used to share with us his love for poetry, Man United as well, British rock music, right? And also his cats and dogs jokes, you know, because he despised cats and dogs. So it was everything very funny, you know, in his lessons. So yeah, although I love animals, you know, I started to follow a bit of his interest, right? And I started to listen, for example, to the Libertines, Baby Shambles, Pete Doherty, you know, this kind of music. And yeah, then I started reading literature as well, right? And then at uni, I decided to study languages because, I found communicating with other people from different countries very interesting, right? So, learning languages, it's a way to discover the world as well. So, yeah, why not share my knowledge with others and in a fun way, right? So,
yeah, that's excellent. It's so often that you hear that an educator's love of teaching and of learning has come from one single teacher. And I think that's a really empowering moment, isn't it? Because you can be that educator that some student of yours goes on to say, I loved working with Pablo. He made me, he taught me an interest, a passion for Spanish. He told me about his love for, I'm going to guess maybe Barcelona, could be Real Madrid. I'm not sure. Maybe it's Man United. But yeah, no, that's a really strong kind of story there, Pablo. So how do you think, what is your current kind of philosophy of teaching languages then? That's such a key part of learning for so many children and adults as well. What is your philosophy of teaching languages?
So I think teaching languages should be fun, but for both the student and the teacher. Okay, I think that, in that way, the student is happy and it encourages him or her to learn more. A student who is encouraged to learn more is always happy. So I think it is a very important point, right, to make the lessons enjoyable. Yeah. Also, it is important to bear in mind students that, well, they may have different goals or a different mindset. So adapting to them, I think it's also key. I have some students from Kuwait, another from Singapore, another from England or from Spain. So I think it's very important, adapting to the student as well.
Yeah. So how have you come to learn how to adapt best to a student? You say adapting to a student is a really key part. When you first start working with a new student, how do you adapt to the way that they learn?
So it depends on the case, right? Some students may be more interested into music, right? Others might be more interested into more kind of literature or more the cultural part of their language, right? Or some others food. Well, food, generally we all love food, right? but yeah, it depends on the student, right? And also, the pace. Yeah, some people, they are quick learners. Some others need a little bit more help, maybe in some areas. But yeah, it's very important adapting to other people's languages. Yeah. To other people's mindset or goals. Yeah.
Mm. Yeah, no, absolutely. I think when I was tutoring languages, which I don't do a great deal of, I tutor more English and maths, but I do also tutor French and a little bit of Spanish as well. And I think I've always found it's trying to avoid too much of the classic classroom style of teaching languages, especially here in the UK. Where it's often just learning kind of banks of words, covering up one side, learning the other side, and then filling out, a sheet with missing words, or, that kind of very classroom style of teaching languages. I feel that it's teaching languages as one would speak a language is in the long run going to be so much more beneficial for that student. So speaking to them in the target language, in French, during the lesson, even if at first they may not catch everything you're saying, if you speak slowly, they will eventually learn some of the key terms and the key ways of speaking in that language. And I think perhaps languages have an advantage in that field, because you can't necessarily do that. You can't teach your lesson in maths, or you can't teach your lesson in geography. So there's a small advantage there. But yeah, no, I think that's really key. I mean, you mentioned there that making your lessons fun is a key part of what you do, and you can tell already, Pablo, that you are enthusiastic and energetic and kind of very humorous individual. So what do you think makes a good language tutoring session?
So, I think, in my case, I like creating my own teaching material. Okay, always supported on other academic material, obviously, right? But in that way, apart from teaching grammar, vocabulary, right, the sort of academic things we are, I have the freedom as well by creating my own material to share culture and music, bring up different topics to engage in conversation, right? So that's what I pretend with my lessons as well, right? To cover different topics as well, and to make it different, every day if I can, and so I think that conversation practice is very important, going through grammar points and vocabulary, and have a good laugh, right? So I think is the perfect language tutoring session.
Yeah, I think that's very true. And when you say have a love, you mean sort of have a passion for it.
And a good laugh as well. And
a good laugh as well. Sorry, I thought you said a good love.
Sorry, and have a good laugh. Yeah.
Have a good laugh. So how did you develop that style, do you think? Why is that the style that you kind of go with for a language tutoring session?
So, I always like to start with the practice, with the conversation, right, and see how has been the last few days for the student, right? And we may talk about very current topics, and then I always try to go to the grammar points, right, which and gradually expand vocabulary, right, and at the same time, try to delve into the Spanish culture and into its music as well, and in that way, make the whole tutoring an interesting experience for the student.
Welcome to a new feature of the Qualified Tutor Podcast, where we'll be hearing briefly from the previous week's guest about what they enjoyed about being on the podcast and what tips they'd have for a future guest on the podcast. First up is last week's guest, Reuven Salmona, who spoke to us about his STEM workshops and about his philosophy on the value of teaching and learning. And you can catch his episode wherever you listen to your podcasts.
I think the best part of being on the podcast was it really allows the speaker to focus and zero in on what you are trying to communicate, what the benefits are, what you're trying to accomplish, and communicate it in a succinct, clear way. My advice to other speakers would be to just be yourself, don't over-prepare, relax, and try to communicate as eloquently as possible the things that are most important to what you're trying to do.
Yeah, so we obviously mentioned there a little bit about kind of your style, but you mentioned at the beginning as well that you owe some gratitude to Superprof for providing you with this platform to be able to deliver these fun, engaging lessons to students. How long have you worked for Superprof? And tell us a little bit about your background to your work with Superprof.
Before I worked at Madrid's airport, first of all. So there and then I moved to London, right? And I worked in London at Heathrow Airport. So I worked in both airports, and I quite enjoyed both jobs because it was a very international, airports are very international environments, right? So there you can meet people from many different countries, right? And you can speak languages, and, it was quite fun, every day meeting new people. But then pandemic started, right? So after when pandemic started, there are no flights, obviously, right? And so I decided to start tutoring, right? And I came across this site, and I started from there. And in a year, more or less, I got more students, and that's how all started, and I'm quite happy for it.
Yeah. So what do you enjoy? What is it about working with the Superprof platform then that you enjoy most?
What I enjoy the most is that, Superprof, it makes things simple in terms of getting contact with new students, right? And it also promotes the idea of giving lessons online, which I think it is very comfortable and useful. So that's two key points, in Superprof.
Yeah. So most of your students come from Superprof. What do you think Superprof? Where do you think it can go? What are the next steps that Superprof can continue to offer, to deliver to the tutoring kind of industry, to the tutoring market?
So I think that we might also find some group tutorings as well. So that would be a good idea. In the future, to find more instead of just individual students, right? So try and give lessons in groups, or maybe more translation and interpreting. I've also been very interested always in translating and interpreting, right? I've been interpreting for medical services here in the UK, in London, and I think it's enriching, helping to communicate with others in these kind of vulnerable situations, right? So, I think Superprof, I think it could do some translating and interpreting as well, right?
Lovely. So, is there, in your role as brand ambassador, what does that mean? What does being a brand ambassador for Superprof, what does that mean?
So basically, well, as a brand ambassador, what I do is I explain the benefits for joining. If in case you join Superprof, well, I explain the benefits of belonging to Superprof and all these advantages that this site has, and which I always recommend other fellow teachers to use and students.
So that's quite a sort of international role then, is it?
Yeah, it is. Because as I said before, I have students from many different countries, from Canada or from Kuwait or from Singapore as well. Yeah. So many different countries.
Yeah. So, I mean, what if it's just incredible to think that you are teaching children who are sitting in their living room or wherever in Kuwait or in Canada or wherever it is. What have you learned by teaching students from so many different parts of the world?
So you can see that to put an example in the case of Asian students, Singapore, China, you can see that they respect teachers in a way that even they are very respectful, let's say, even sometimes too much, right, for what we are used to here in the Western countries, right? So they always wait for the teacher to finish their sentences, and they just speak whenever you ask them to do, right? So in that case, you have to be more mindful also with the cultural differences, right? And adapt to those situations, yeah.
Lovely. And what have you noticed about teaching kids here in the UK? Is there something that you find is a kind of pattern across students learning languages here in the UK?
So the parents like for their children that they learn languages from an early age. So I think that there's a lot of parents who that's why they like to reach Superprof and find an outstanding tutor for the children so that they can learn a language from an early age. Because the truth is that if you start learning a language since you're a kid, then you'll probably speak it fluently in the future.
And what's that told you then about your own language kind of acquisition? Because you've obviously spoken Spanish since you were a child, and now as an adult you've learned a bit of Portuguese, as a bit of Mandarin Chinese. What have been the differences to learning as an adult compared to learning as a child?
Well, I'm in my case, I was lucky because my parents want me to learn English since I was 2. That's the lucky point, right? But then when I was 18 or so, I decided to learn other languages because I've always been very curious about other countries, cultures, So I took lessons as well. And then I also tried to engage in conversation with other people, right? So in the case of French, right, I made a very good friend who is from Cameroon, right? So in Cameroon, their mother tongue is French, apart from other many different languages, right? So in that way, I also learned French through making acquaintances as well in French, right? Or in the case of Chinese, when I lived in Madrid, I lived in an area where there are many Chinese people, right? So I used to go to the shops and speak to Chinese people there, and that was another way to improve my Chinese as well. So I think that's the beauty of languages as well, right? So you can get to know other people, make new friends, and that's the point, I think.
I would totally agree, Pablo. I did French at university, and it allowed me to spend a year in France, in which I did exactly as you said, just experience new culture, experience new people, make new friends, and it's got new types of friends as well. I think that's always very interesting, that friendship with someone where they speak a language that isn't your first language, but is a language that you're learning, because you learn a great deal about yourself in that friendship, because it's not, it's not your mother tongue, it's not your native language. So you've come at it from a slightly different angle, and you're having to work on not only the language side of things, but also, making friends with someone. And I have noted as well that over the years, if my level of language, whether it's French or Spanish, it's dipped slightly, it suddenly, there's this bizarre experience where it becomes harder to speak to a friend of yours, which is a very strange experience, because you don't have that with friends of yours who speak your native tongue. So, it's almost it's a great reason to continue learning a language once you've made friends in that language, because otherwise you may lose those friendships. So I mean, Pablo, this has been a really great chat. We speak to tutors from a very, very wide range of subjects on this podcast, including people who aren't really necessarily tutors. They might be more teachers, or they might work as tutoring business leaders, or in the education space generally. But it's great to talk about languages from time to time. Probably slightly biased, because as the host of this podcast and as a great lover of languages, I'd probably love to do it more, but it's a small proportion of the wider tutoring market. But it's been great to speak to you, and perhaps further down the line, when this podcast has exploded onto the podcasting space, we can have a version in Spanish, we can have a Portuguese version, we can have a Mandarin Chinese version of this episode as well. But I'd love to finish on a question that I love asking guests when they come on, which is, what's next for you? What's next for you in 2022 and beyond?
So I'll continue with my tutoring lessons, okay? Because I think I'm quite enjoying it, and it's very comfortable, right? Working from home. And as I said before, I've always been into translating and interpreting, right? So I think I would like as well to work for the police or the courts at the same time I continue with the tutoring sessions. So yeah, that would be the ideal thing for me, I think.
Is there another language that you'd like to add to your armory?
I mean, I've just been in Egypt, so while I was in Egypt, I was dreaming, right, of learning Arabic as well. But for the time being, it's just a dream, okay? Because languages, it takes a lot of time, effort. So for the time being, I'm happy with the languages I already speak.
Yeah, well, no pressure to learn anymore. That's already 4 or 5 that you've mastered, Pablo. But no, thank you, Pablo, so much for coming on, for giving up your time, for representing Superprof in your capacity as brand ambassador. I think it's a great thing to be part of, and not only to be a part of the Superprof community, but also to be able to represent them, to go that step further and be a brand ambassador for them. So if you are thinking that you would like to join the wonderful community that is Superprof, just head to superprof.co.uk. You can sign up to become a tutor very easily, very simply. There are thousands and thousands of hundreds of thousands of students on there looking for sessions, across a wide range of subjects, not necessarily just academic. That's what Superprof do so well, is they offer all kinds of instruction and training and coaching, as well as academic tutoring as well. So thank you, Pablo. I hope you enjoyed. This was your first podcast, I believe.
Yep, it was.
There we go.
It's been, I quite enjoyed it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
That's a pleasure. We very much enjoyed having you on, Pablo. Next week, we'll be talking to Henry Dingle, who is a member of the Qualified Tutor community and offers tuition as part of a 12-week mentorship program where he helps students with their English, maths, mindset, mentorship, but also supports parents in their role as the kind of educator with their kids. I think it's a great dichotomy to have, is to be supporting the students as well as the parents alongside that. So we'll be talking to him about his new video course, Trusting Your Teen, and that's going to be a really great episode for students, for tutors, and also for parents. But Pablo, that's been a wonderful conversation about what it means to make languages tutoring effective. Part of that is making it fun. And I think that's a really good starting point for so many tutors of languages. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Ludo, for everything. And I hope to see you soon.
Lovely. We will see you all next time then, dear listeners. Cheerio.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Qualified Tutor Podcast. Whether you're a regular listener of this podcast or you've just stumbled across it, join the Qualified Tutor Podcast group within the Qualified Tutor community to stay up to date with our latest news, offers, workshops, and of course, simply to meet other tutors like you. Whatever your level as a tutor, our training courses will be the next step in your professional development. Visit qualifiedtutor.org/training to find out more about our CPD accredited and Ofqual recognised courses, the first of their kind in the tutoring industry. Your student deserves the best tutor possible. Make that happen today by joining Qualified Tutor